Welcome to the Muslim Faculty of Advanced Studies Online. For more information about our programs, publications and membership, please visit our website, themuslimfaculty.org.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone to the last session of the autumnal term, Society through Literature. We did originally plan to have Sheikh Bahak with us. He's unfortunately, or well, fortunate for him, but unfortunately for us, he's gone off to Seville. So, but in conversation with him yesterday, we were speaking about today's program, and he mentioned, and I thought it was worth passing it on, that with respect to Sheikh Dr. Abdul Qadir as-Sufi's oeuvre, he said that there were 5 books which, in his opinion, and I would definitely agree with him, he said that there were 5 books which would provide, or which offer a total re-education or reorientation of our understanding as Muslims, and which then in fact become essential as a way of not only instructing ourselves in terms of the deen and in terms of the times we live in, but clearly that also becomes an important resource with respect to our own work of da'wah, of calling to the deen with an understanding which then becomes something recognizable and instantly effective. So those 5 books, which then clearly come as, then it's a recommendation for anyone who hasn't actually read them, then on the strength of that recommendation, they should be studied. And for those who have, a revisit never does any harm. Although I expect we'll be taking readings today, hopefully at least a couple of the books on the list, but let me give them to you now. The first was The Book of Strangers. The second, The Way of Muhammad. The third, Root Islamic Education. The fourth, The 100 Steps. And the fifth, The Time of the Bedouin. Those 5, with those 5, one's equipped. To not only to begin, but to make progress. Now, so that by way of introduction. So what we're going to do then today is we're going to offer 3 readings from Sheikh Abdul Qadir's work, and probably around 10 minutes each or something, thereabouts. And what we'll do is we'll pause between each or after each reading, so to give us a chance to to reflect and discuss anything that that might arise from the readings themselves. That's that really. So I'll begin, and I'm going to read from the Book of Strangers, And the bit I've chosen is particularly relevant because and for those who aren't familiar basically with the Book of Strangers, Michel Carter wrote it in the early 70s, 1972 it was published, I believe. And it's a book of spiritual search, really. And the main character is the story of this main character's rejection, basically, of the situation that he's in, and the movement towards the reality of things. And it's set in a future which, in fact, feels and sounds very familiar now, more than ever. So this section is from his notebook, and in his notebook, the Kaisel, who is the central character, he is observing. He's an academic, he's a librarian, and he's observing his colleagues. And so there's a note of warning for us at the faculty and anyone embarking on a career in academia. If you find yourself too closely reflected in any of these descriptions, then be warned. 10 years now, I have been keeper of the archives. For 10 years, I have authorized the study of books on every subject. Specialized, abstruse, ancient, every title has passed through my hands and into the hands of men of so-called learning. Scholars, intellectuals. While they have studied, I have studied. They, their books. I, the process of study itself. I have watched them come into the library, watched them while they were there, and watched them after they have left. I have seen some in their youth, others in the fullness of life, and some on the edge of death. I can no longer contain what I know. I must at least set it down, although what I want to say is so total a rejection of the whole basis on which our society is built, is such an absolute refusal of the whole learning structure that determines all our social and subjective goals, that I hesitate even to commit the idea to paper. What I know cannot be reduced to one pole of dialectic, for implicit in what I see is a rejection of the very methodology that sees things in dialectical terms. I must not even express what is in my mind in this language, or the whole thing will founder in the dead sea of speculation in which my so-called intellectuals aimlessly swim every day of their lives. I have an idea, and I know that whenever I set it down, as surely as the sun will go down under the horizon this evening, someone will walk into my life and take that thought, that last bit of worked-out clarity from my head, and crush it like so much earth until it crumbles like dust in his hands. I'm frightened of this as much as I long for it. I always relied on my head. It's got me where I am. But where's that? That death cannot find me when he wants me. In the ancient scholastic tradition, I hold Thursdays. It sounds quaint. It is. There is only one entertaining thing, and that is that what began as a straight encounter where the heavy intellectuals could meet and beat their brains out has become the special secret laboratory of the keeper of the archives. I watch them scamper like so many white mice inside the cages of their thoughts. I observe them when they behave among the syntax in a predictable way, and I note with care when they malfunction and why. The more evidence I build up, the more I am appalled. Only my awareness that I am no different from them, but for this dreadful hidden secret, keeps me from announcing to all and sundry that we are the dupes of our smooth, functioning two-unit cortex, the greater part of which lies dormant and inactive. Clinical study of sundry self-styled intellectuals who meet at the garden villa of the State University Keeper of the Archives, sometimes called the librarian. It must be understood that these people are considered the cream of society, and therefore must also be seen beyond their subjective value as being a crystallization of the culture from which they come. Professor Aller has the chair of functional linguistics at SUL. This chair was founded when the philosophy department was disbanded on the recommendation of the new university computer, which informed the Senate that since philosophy had been reduced to language analyses, it was no longer a fit subject for study by humans, unless, it added in a rare moment of character potential, the current philosophers could posit a good reason why they should continue to labour at what the electronics could do with such ease and speed. Excuse me. It was not long after that the doctors came up with their new game, functional linguistics. In other words, they applied the last game technique of data-based learning, structuralism, to linguistics. The relationship between language structure and results deduced from differing sets of given terms. Vocabulary extension and vocabulary change began to be applied to various complex social situations, and the endless descriptive approach to reality went on, as did the doctors' salaries. Professor Aller, then, is a specialist in how we use our thought structures to deal with our experiential reality on a social level, an interpersonal level, a psychosomatic and an unconscious level, and so on. You see how complex we seem to have become. But I'm impatient to write about the good professor. I cannot wait to put down the truth about my doctor of words. He has a stutter. His situationist calls it a signals block and gives him touch games to ease his tongue, and his psychograph reports a communication stress problem and recommends light narcosis. So this is a description from the notes of Dr. Aller. He's lean, over 6 feet tall, stoops, speech impediment marked under stress, uncoordinated body movement with a tendency to short-sightedness, difficulty in negotiating small objects and ordinary environment, trips on carpet, knocks over cups, spoons, and so on. Particular disorientation at table with a reversal that could be recognized as infantile. Self-reprimanding when clumsy, has been known playfully to slap his own face to check disorderly actions. Brushes back lock of hair in constant repetitive gesture throughout all social encounters. Always when anyone enters a room, even library. Tugs left earlobe when expounding complex linguistic theory. Jumps if touched. Over-courteous in the presence of women. Becomes somewhat foolish in the presence of attractive ones. May even guffaw. Nevertheless, has marked and much observed series of adventures with younger students and secretaries at the Senate. His wife, dominant, charming, disdainful, with her own social orbit that coincides with his only on public occasions, interviews, etc. Eating habits. No sense of the aesthetic. Looks on food as fodder. Uncritical, and will always choose baby food when possible. Likes artificial fruit drinks, ice cream, chocolate. Sugar level high. Psychograph considers it to be above compensatory level and critical. Physical exercise, none. No time spent alone, except in the evenings when fatigued. Does information intake before going to bed. Uses barbiturates only under stress. Does not use tranquilizers. Constant, unchecked hand movement, neck muscle pulling becoming more acute. Toe tension constant. Holiday habits, busman's holiday, usually lecturing summer semester on foreign campus. So that's our first reading. What do you think? How did that strike you? What's Shekhabad saying there?
He's supposed to be the elite of the elite, isn't he?
These are the cream of society.
Absolutely, cream of society.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point, that if you have to look, that if that's what this society produces as the cream, then where is this society at?
Well, that's the sole purpose of education, is to reach that level, which has no functional use.
Well, interesting to consider in the context of the faculty, isn't it?
I didn't. I'm sorry, but I didn't catch that connection between the neurosis and the. I missed the bridge part. So the person you were describing at the end was one particular.
That's one particular professor of linguistics.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, functional linguistics, apparently.
Yeah. You probably find lots of these people in Oxford, and I've met people like this. Yeah.
Everywhere. I mean, in that environment, and it's the thing. And the irony, of course, is that amongst the many ironies, that he's this professor of functional linguistics, and his first outstanding tick is a speech impediment, which then he's on drugs for, and has to be taking some kind of yeah.
It's keeping up appearances, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's keeping up appearances, even, in fact, because it's been seen very clearly, he's been observed very clearly, and that appearance, I think the thing is that it doesn't seem to matter. In fact, that it might even be...
But it matters to this man, surely, this professor.
I don't think it does.
He doesn't?
No. I mean, the narrator, it matters to him.
Oh yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I mean, that the observer matters to him.
Yeah.
But his keeping abreast of, especially because an academic's not in isolation, is it, amongst others.
Yeah.
And they're all trying to do each other.
But I don't know.
The impression I get from my friends from Oxford that it seems very competitive. So.
It's very competitive.
Yeah.
Like scientists.
No, it's extremely competitive, and there's a great deal of insecurity, and
Exactly,
and so these Thursdays that are being described, they can be particularly fraught anyway, but it's some kind of tradition, and it's an opportunity, as the narrator says, for him to make his own observations, and clearly, because he is on a personal journey, clearly something has opened up within him that is causing him to take note of these circumstances and these people. I mean, there are you get 4 of these portraits. I thought it fair just to focus on one. There's also a female colleague who I thought it might have been interesting to contrast her description with his, which I might do possibly if just to give you the kind of comparison. But there's also, I don't know whether you noticed, that mention of the computer, which has actually become the decision maker with respect to the management of the curriculum and the decisions about personnel and courses and clearly and everything else.
Part of this technique kind of.
Yeah. And so these, the contradiction, the human
Yeah, I see. Yeah, the humanity,
it's no longer an
the
issue.
functional kind of.
Yeah.
It's not relevant.
It's there. What's there to be measured, to be medicated if necessary.
It's this. What do you call it? Sorry. What's the term when you measure things scientifically? I mean, it's the evidence that. I just run out of my head. I'll catch it in a minute.
The thing about the Thursday.
Empirical
Yeah.
Measuring. That everything seems to be reduced to kind of empirical. Hence the kind of, well, how do you prove God empirically? Well, why can't you try rationally as opposed to empirically? I think that the rational side, so I think it's all has to be measured and computed and boxed and ticked. Is that
Well, that's it. Well, that's what lies at the the foundation of this.
That's in 1970.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I haven't quite reached this. That's interesting.
Yeah, but it's really what it's happened now, isn't it? I mean, it's definitely.
Sure.
I mean, every aspect of that is totally familiar to us,
Yes.
and we're subject to it.
It's interesting, the Thursday night, because there's a parallel thing in the history of Niels Bohr. When he was a little boy and he had a younger brother, I think the brother was like 10 and 8 years old. His father was a professor in Copenhagen University, and he used to have just such a night where the other professors and lecturers would come to the house and they'd kind of discuss all the new things that were coming about. But you got the impression of not a dysfunctional event, but of people who are genuinely fascinated in their subjects and were excited about the things that were happening. And somehow these two boys were allowed to attend, but they weren't allowed to say a word. And they kind of, it was a formative thing for Niels Bohr that he witnessed these older men and their interest and their passion for these things. So something's happened in the interim that was quite interesting at one point and has now become as described here.
Wasn't there a sentence at the very beginning about the difference between knowledge and... Wasn't there a sentence like that early on? Can you find it?
Well, I think about
Read the whole
the
thing.
whole first paragraph. I think is making that point. I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because it lies in that if you are actually seeking something, it lies totally beyond the information technology. And they only have that, they don't have anything else. I mean, at least this professor doesn't have anything else.
Yeah, philosophy gets abandoned because the computers can work out the linguistic aspects much faster.
But the other thing he says, which I think is also a warning, is that he says that he doesn't exclude himself from, from the whole process. He's not, in a sense, looking down on these people. He admits to being one of them. Yeah.
Which we are.
Yeah, definitely.
Can't help it.
Yeah.
I think it's quite radical to be able to see that one may be part of it. Most people don't see this at all.
Well, that's
they just quite happily roll on, go with the flow.
Abstract.
Yeah. I think so one of the key things in terms of what you've just said. You see, I mean, we probably don't take a great deal of notice, or we don't look at ourselves in that way, or maybe even others. We just let it all kind of wash over us, and
it's easier.
Yes, it's easier, but
Got bills to pay.
And I think an important point here is that in terms of looking at this from the point of view of society through literature, then we see that the importance of this piece of writing and others like it. And these are things that, in his writing are constantly repeated in different ways and in different, places at different times, constantly. But it is to do with the deen, because the deen is for healthy people.
Sure.
And the deen will work best and is most likely to manifest through healthy human beings. But what's being described, which is a universal state of affairs in the midst of this nihilism, is that everybody's walking around in this reduced, degenerate, psychotic, or various states of psychosis. And it's the norm.
Do you think this was the case in Dickens' time or Jane Austen's time, for example? That, when did this nihilistic tendency, was this post-industrial revolution, are we talking? But before that, people did have a God, they were Christian, or Christianity was part of people's lives, more so than, I'm just wondering at that point,
that was
the nexus.
Sorry. The material I had from Nietzsche, the Heidegger quoting from Nietzsche, which I didn't use in full, but he's basically saying this is a very, very old story. It's not something that's happened recently. Of course, it's had stages and epochs. He says it's actually the history of the West. This is what Heidegger and Nietzsche are saying for various things, various reasons. But if you even going back to my youth, it was so much less
it
than
seems
now.
to be exponential.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
This is an unofficial reading I'm throwing in here, if you don't mind, on this point. It's from another of Joe Carter's novels, The 10 Symphonies of Gorka Koenig. And he says something which I think is quite relevant to the point the question you're asking. Just briefly, Gorka Koenig is it's set in the sort of immediate post-Second World War period, and Gorka Koenig is a composer, a genius, a prodigy, and he comes from a circle of prodigious talent in terms of his parents and his circle. His wife is a psychiatrist and an important figure in the book, in fact, and very important. And this is what her thinking is. Her name's Frida. She says, Frida was writing her controversial and political work on psychiatry, Fashions in Madness, a study in autism. In this long and difficult work, she combined clinical study and aphoristic comment, which perhaps more than anything else revealed the impact that her father-in-law being Gorka Koenig's father, who's a philosopher, a Nietzschean philosopher. So the impact that her father-in-law was having on the Koenigs. For just as Gorka's music changed through their dialogue, so did her style and method of expression. Her thesis, that each epoch produced a style of madness in harmony or dissonance with its method of creating ultimate stress, implied a direct link between the world of the psyche and the world of politics. She outlined what she called the Ophelia complex as the form of madness of the medieval society, where the victim was almost always a woman, and her technique of inner survival was to drift from reality. Her other example of this complex was Lady Macbeth, for she suggested this type of madness dominated until the Renaissance. The Industrial Revolution brought what she called Gothic madness, or schizophrenia, with its highly dramatic splitting of the personality. Here, she suggested Mary Shelley's Frankenstein myth as embodying the process, which was that the schizophrenic other was a monstrous creation, a monstrous, lovable creation of its unacknowledged master. This was also defined as a classical form of schizophrenia by Stevenson in his Dr. Jekyll legend. Frieda saw autism as the robot age's form of madness, a deeper sickness indicating a more alienated society. So going back to Dickens's time,
Sure.
then this is in the heart of that. So, you know, the age of technique, or the imposition of technique, also has its expressions and its stages and its reflection in the psyche of the people caught up in it. Interesting, eh?
Yes, I'm just conjuring up a mental image at the moment. But, it's almost a description of evolution. And that if you allow things to happen in their own way, if you detach mankind from the deed, then as the philosophers have to work out the meaning of life, and the industrialists and everybody else, they're all, it becomes chaotic, because there's no traction, if you like, with the deed. Because essentially what's happened is that, well, Europe's obviously been removed from it for a long time. But it seems that this, I don't know whether this technique is driven by any, it's like a conspiracy idea that there's a handful of people driving this, or whether it's just purely a natural reaction to not having guidance. I don't know what your opinion is on that, but does that make sense?
I think, well, I was trying from one aspect to look at that. Because it's not conspiracy, but it can be deliberate, just different thing.
I meant deliberate, really.
Yeah, but conspiracy implies a kind of an organisational...
Someone's conspiring to pervert something.
Yeah, well, there's a difference between deliberate and conspiracy.
Okay.
Yeah? So, this is just my take on it. I'm not saying it's doctrine or anything, but it seems to me that what I was trying to outline in the first paper was about nihilism being the result of idealism. This very deliberate people with the very deliberate ideals having this effect. Because conspiracy demands too much suspension of critical faculties. The idea of large numbers of people organised in a certain way to trick everybody else. But the fact that something is deliberate doesn't mean it's a conspiracy.
But you think it's this deliberate plan, if you like, is meant to, they have honourable intentions originally, or do you think there's a deliberate ploy to increase the wealth for a few people and make it, or is that the consequence of the fact that people have become, for example, that the money system has been distorted so that a small number of people become advantaged and the majority become disadvantaged, for example? Do you think that's deliberate, or do you think that's a consequence of somebody coming up with a good idea, like like insider trading of Rothschilds, for example, who clearly saw a good thing when he was making lots of money?
Well, once you change the nature of the money and once you permit interest, then you've unleashed an exponential force.
Precisely.
Yeah? that
So I was
works
thinking,
in the favour of those people
yeah.
who are permitted to do that.
Mm.
So that there's no avoiding that.
Mm.
It's not a conspiracy to enrich certain people at the expense of others. That's just the beast that's been unleashed, really. I think it was in Dublin that Imam Yahya, in a khutbah actually, he cited Hjalmar Schacht. And Hjalmar Schacht was a Danish-German man who was famous as Hitler's banker.
Mm.
But he quoted him as saying that if you've got an even playing field and one person's allowed to charge 1% interest, that person's really got to take the lot.
Yeah.
Is what Schacht said. He's got to accumulate everything. So it's almost like fluid dynamics.
Yes.
Once you allow this thing to happen,
Yes.
you're going to get these forces and things happening.
So-
It isn't it? Exponential mathematics comes from the study of compound interest. That's where they discovered it.
Well, logarithms and things, yeah.
Yeah. So, and once you've got interest, it's going to be compound. In fact, there isn't any differentiation between simple and compound interest. All interest becomes compound. It's always interest on top of interest. So that's just the monetary part of it. I don't think your question was entirely monetary.
No, but I'm just interested in this exponential because the exponentialism is a natural phenomenon as well. So I'm wondering whether this is a result of because no one person having any particular responsibility for a collective happening. Does it then become like as soon as you say, as soon as you permit, as soon as someone says it is permissible to charge interest, then this is the natural effect that people will take that advantage, and then there's a kind of human nature. It seems to be a kind of where is it natural and where is it unnatural, man-made in that respect. I mean, is the man-made? I'm just curious. Is this an inevitable?
I'd make a differentiation between mathematical and natural. Yeah.
Right.
Exponential is mathematical. It's not natural. You can think of very few processes that.
Well, we have exponential shapes in nature, like a snail shell and things like that. But I mean,
Is that exponential? An exponential thing is a thing that goes into infinite growth.
Well, it's like a curve like that, isn't it? Or you can go the other way like a trumpet. I mean, that's an exponential curve. So,
But it doesn't go off. Exponential goes off to infinity.
Yeah.
That's an exponential
Yeah.
curve. It ends going off to infinity. In other words, it has to collapse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all natural forms they don't go off
stop.
to infinity.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
They cease. Yeah. They
Sorry,
reach-
Hans, you were going to
they
say.
reach a natural limit.
So,
I think the question of I think the real question is, and going back to the what the value of these reflections are in terms of literature is that you see the whole thing is brought into a coherent picture.
Sure.
Now we're kind of trying to break it apart, which is fine, but the value of the literature and the description is that this is what you get. This is the convergence of all of these elements, and they are unnatural, therefore they're unjust, and this has consequences for the human creature. And basically by unleashing these elements into the environment, then what's taking place is experimental.
Yeah.
It's not even as if, so the question of intention and deliberation and so on, that's neither here nor there. Because empirically then what takes place is that our so-called scientists and pseudoscientists, social scientists and so on, they make it their business to then justify the experiment, measure its effects, and hold their places in the whole process of giving that legitimacy. So the fact that you're a nutcase as a result of what you've been subjected to by all of this, let's call it injustice, in the broadest sense, then you're just something to be measured. You're someone to be treated. It's the way things are, and now we've created an environment which hurts everyone, but then we'll come up with a cure for everyone. But all of that comes out of the same thinking. It all comes out of the same environment, and it's a closed, descending loop.
It's a loop, yeah.
And so breaking that loop becomes then the issue. And that gives an understanding of the impact of the deen, which is necessary in this time that this loop has almost reached, its end game. Because otherwise, and without this kind of insight, the temptation or the likelihood is that the deen is taken as some kind of medicine. In other words, it becomes part of the range of treatments that these poor, sick human beings can reach for. And they're all the same, because they're all forms of spirituality. So you can reach for Islam, go ahead, no problem. If that's what's going to stop you from stammering, off you go. Buddhism, a bit of yoga, some New Age stuff, and coming to the deen. So people coming to the deen, actually, it's quite likely that it might be some of the, even if it's unconscious and unarticulated, that's the kind of expectation. This will be better for me. But that's actually not what the deen holds out.
Yes.
It's the deen, as I said earlier, will express itself most effectively through healthy people, the most healthy people. And as we know, the people who are best before the deen are the ones who are, most outstanding in it. And this is, and in our age, where given the environment of psychological and physical sickness that we're surrounded by and accustomed to, then our whole attention, in fact, is turned towards that state of affairs. And we are encouraged to become preoccupied with it, so that we become preoccupied with the disabled and the mentally ill, and normalizing their state of affairs.
Yes.
And huge amounts of energy, sympathy, resources are trained towards that growing reality. This is, in fact, inimical to the advent of the deen in a healthy way that will restore balance. So in one sense, it's not that the people of the deen are without compassion. The deen is compassion, but it is also just. And for it to succeed, then it arrives with a force and with a. It's such a strong statement in opposition to this other injustice that it can be a shock, but it's the kind of shock that that's needed.
Yeah.
I think. Shall we move on to our second reading?
Please. Thank you.
We had some discussion because of the fact that this is the course on society through literature, as to whether this book, for example, The Time of the Bedouin, is literature or history or sociology, or under what heading it should be subsumed. It's very interesting because the collected works contains mostly literature. It has the Book of Strangers, which Hadruthman just read from, and then we've also the 10 symphonies and Oedipus and Dionysus, which are recognisably works of literature. But actually, if you look at Sheikh al-Qadir's writing, whether as Sheikh al-Qadir as-Sufi or Ian Dallas, really the literary quality is uniform, or not uniform, but it spreads throughout all of it. So this is technically a work of, as I said, history, politics, economics, but its literary quality is very high. And actually, I want to break the order, because when you said I'd read on a little bit further from this passage that I'm going to read, and then there was a passage from Rilke addressing Ibsen and about what Ibsen did. And just some of the things that this passage from Sheikh al-Qadir reminded me very much of this. Farther in than anyone has ever been, a door had sprung open before you, and now you were among the alembics in the firelight. In there, where mistrustful you wouldn't take anyone with you, in there you sat and discerned transitions. And there, since your blood drove you not to form or to break, but to reveal, there you made the enormous decision so to magnify these tiny events, which you yourself first perceived only in test tubes, that they would be seen by thousands of people, immense before them all. Your theatre came into being. You were there, and everything that is barely measurable, an emotion that rises by half a degree, the angle of reflection read off from up close, of a will burdened by an almost infinitesimal weight, the slight cloudiness in a drop of longing, and that barely perceptible colour change in an atom of confidence, all this you had to determine. For it is in such reactions that life existed, our life, which has slipped into us so deeply that it was hardly possible even to make conjectures about it anymore. And it seems to me that a little bit he's describing what Sheikh al-Qadir has done with this description of the professor and other people. This is what literature does supremely well. But this is quite a different passage, really, and it very recognisable from what we've been doing in quite a lot of our courses. At this point, it can be recognised that with the French Revolution, a new social system came into being. Its implications were far-reaching. It was not a French phenomenon, but rather took on an apocalyptic and world significance. In the process, it abolished monarchy, and with it consigned the concept of monarchy to the dustbin of history. Monarchy was declared an anachronism. it was not modern. At the trial of Louis XVI, the Montagnards declared, Louis Capet is guilty of having been king. In the process, the revolution abolished religion, the word religion being from the Latin religio, to bind together. The modern, that is revolutionary state, was atheist by its inner necessity. The state was the binding factor. When Napoleon permitted the Catholic Church to return, it was to be as a reductive system, devoid of papal, that is, decisive ruling power, education, and even obligations. Your rights are dead, your creeds are dead, your social order too. Where tarries here the man who said, See, I make all things new? Religion was redefined as belief, and in turn consigned to the dustbin of the unconscious. What came in place of the natural social cycles of personal rule was the headless structuralist state. Its primary elite were the political class, the legislators. Representatives and presidents came and went. Behind them, the institutions of police and army remained unchanging and unelected. Yet over that time, from the assignats, the paper credit note money of the revolution, the banking class slowly, step by step, emerged from the evolutionary swamps of modernity, finally to dominate the landscape, carnivorous monsters ready to devour the herbivorous talking class of the legislators. The sect had taken over the forest. It had been the takeover of the sect, warned against by so many great writers and thinkers, which went unnoticed and misunderstood by the masses. It is that power system which, having reached its apogee at the turn of the 20th century, now is in process of irreversible decline and collapse. The end of the monarchic epoch can be dated over two sages and in two places, although the end of that epoch has other dates and places of political consequence and significance. The Great Interregnum began in 1793 with the guillotining of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. With the end of monarchy came the end of womanhood. Marie Antoinette was not executed as Queen of France, but as a woman. The abolition of monarchy was the abolition of inheritance. The abolition of inheritance was the abolition of the family. The end of the family was the beginning of humanism. The beginning of humanism was the abolition of womanism. Woman had been abolished. Under the terror, the humans shaved the heads of women collaborators with the Ancien Regime. In the liberation of 1944, the humans shaved the heads of thousands of women collaborators with the German occupation. The other key date opening the Great Interregnum was 1909, when the forces of the uprising of the city of Istanbul, led by the rebel Mustafa Riza, later named Ataturk, in defiance of his own oath of allegiance, stormed the palace and dethroned Sultan Abdul Hamid Khan II to the cries of liberté, fraternité, égalité. The Sultanate itself was not formally abolished until 1922. Now the end of the Great Interregnum has arrived. It's appropriate that its imminent disappearance be examined to recognise that in-back process which will activate its inevitable demise. In order to view this full eclipse, the eyes must be able to observe closely and avoid being blinded by the dazzling event. To facilitate the investigation, it is necessary to choose a guide who is neither a product of the decline under examination nor a prey to the outdated dialectics of the present system, or even its media simplifications. The approaches to the event will therefore be through an ancient master and a modern one. Ibn Khaldun, born Tunis 1332, and Ernst Jünger, born Heidelberg 1895. To a generation fed on movies and television, there is no direct access to the worldview of preceding generations, let alone the preceding centuries. Part of the abolition of history has been its reconstruction for the masses as entertainment, the subtext always being that was then and this is now. Are we not lucky to have missed the bad old days? The collapse of the sect's social order was well understood by the great writers of the 19th century at the very moment the sect could point to its greatest hegemonic triumph. Wagner's incomparable and gigantic music drama, The Ring of the Nibelung, was even at the time recognized as announcing the end of an age. Its significance lay in his profound insight that the power of the elite, the gods, lay not in their position but in their possessions. The gods take absolute power by entering their castle Valhalla. Their rule is sustained no longer by their warrior class, the Valkyrie, but by owning the ring. The ring, made from the gold of the Nibelung, permits them to wield absolute power. The gold itself is no longer needed. Throughout the drama, it remains guarded in a cave until Siegfried slays Fafnir, the dragon who protects it. The gold in the cave, real capital, is never used. The ring, the magical dimension of gold, is enough to give power. The function of power is increase. Increase in the transaction is usury itself. The core of the epic is the emergence of the hero whose necessary condition is that he should have no fear. Thus he is able to kill Fafnir and pass through the ring of fire to release the Valkyrie, Brunhilde, with a kiss. It is by the awakening of woman, who, it will be remembered, had been abolished to open the way to humanism and the bankers' misogynist sect, that the new era is announced. It is the warrior woman who avenges the male hero victim Siegfried and returns the ring to its natural place in nature, the river. The Rhine, receiving the ring and thus the gold, overflows its banks, inundating the domain of the gods Valhalla. The end of a whole social order, its gods, its heroes, its evaluations, everything is swept away. The amazing cathartic finale to the epic comes with the vast relief that it is all over. The age is finished. Yet it is a vision of hope. For while Brunhilde in her immolation leaps in an oblivion to reunite with her lover, so the people, the masses, turn to face a new beginning, a new order, what Carl Schmitt designated as a new nomos on the earth. So many of the themes from our courses, all of our courses, very close to them.
I think a key theme actually comes up very strongly, which has been creeping out even in our previous discussion, this question of the abolition of womanhood and women is one which actually is utterly crucial. It's utterly crucial to get it. And I think Joe Bocado, whether, as you say, whether writing as Joe Bocado or as Ian Dallas, has approached that one from a number of angles and constantly returns to it. And to paraphrasing from what you were reading, you said that it was on the back of the abolishment of women that the misogynistic sect was able to take hold of the politics of power through finance, and then to have the whole thing contained in Wagner's or the real role of the woman in the ring. In that way, it's saying something. Going back to this matter of the state that we're in as human beings, brought up, born, raised and educated in this setting, is that that we're all off to such a, unless we're extremely lucky, we're off to a bad start because of the death of the woman in the whole life transaction. And in a sense, what's being said very clearly, that unless that's recognised and recovered, all of our efforts to take the deen on and get out of it as living human beings, what it's capable of, what its potential is, until that recovers, it's not going to work.
This death of the woman, maybe this is tying up with feminism, that are we talking about the death of the natural function of the woman, that we have to make her work and be like a man now? Is this what's alluded to? I think must have.
Well, the woman being made to work and be like a man is part of the destruction of the true potential of what the woman is in the whole unfolding of the deen.
Because in Islam, obviously, the man and the woman have quite distinct roles, and that's the destruction of that distinct role. Is what we're...
men and women, in the deen, men and women have distinct roles. Now, in a way, I'm glad you said that, because it's one of those. In fact, I think it's a perfect example of what has happened to us. First of all, what's happened to our language, and how that has been kidnapped. So our capacity for language has been kidnapped by technique.
Sure.
So that, although what you say has a ring of truth about it, in fact, it is not coming from, it is coming from a tainted or undermined view of existence. And so let's just look at it. Let's go back to it. In the deen, or in Islam, I think you said, men and women have distinct roles. Right. In Islam, if you repeat that phrase to yourself, by the time you get to the fourth repetition, it will sound as senseless as it really is. I challenge you to do it. Say, in Islam, and see how long it takes before you realise that it's utterly hollow. What does that mean? And yet, it's on the very tip of the tongue of every other Muslim I've ever met.
Yeah, it's admittedly common.
Now, first of all, so that's the first observation. I don't want us to spend too much time looking at that here and now, but it's an important observation to make. So that's the first part of it.
Get the wording right, I think.
Yeah, but it's not the wording, you see. It's the reality that has to be...
Well, Allah has...
No, but you see, it can't be said. It can't be said until it can be pointed to. I mean, it goes back to what in some sense, because there's a parallel going on when Hadra Samad in the first lecture today spoke about nihilism in the sense of the disjunction of order and location.
Uh-huh.
And there's a parallel that goes on in language with the form and meaning of language, which has been, which is actually continues to be interfered with, let's say. Together, it's a recipe for utter loss. Utter loss. And it means that we actually have to take this back into our possession. Location will give us the points of, or the reference points that will rescue our language. So that instead of standing away from the reality, which we've all been taken away from it, which allows us to say things like, in Islam, the roles of women, men and women are distinct. We can't point to that anywhere. It's techno-speak and open to every form of use and misuse anyone cares to put it to. So the point is then that we come back to the reality of, because if we talk about the reality of women, we're also talking about the reality of men.
Well, naturally, yeah.
So that, but the woman has been dealt with in a particular way, and that is because she is the bedrock without which it cannot happen. We cannot recover the Dean's potential.
Oh.
And hence, Shobhakada does place a lot of emphasis on the couple as being really the atomic
building block, if you like.
Of the whole thing. It contains the explosive power of the Deen to manifest, and if that's lost, then until the couple appears, you don't have the child that emerges from that environment. So which then allows for the emergence of a human being that is fearless, or that is formed in such a way, or that is open and spontaneous and open to the arrival of the Deen, in order to embody it. It's a very important matter, this one. And again, you see,
Its location, I'm getting slightly getting out of my comfort zone here, but
then we're doing the right thing then. Yeah.
excuse my technique here. What is the simple answer to, I hate to use the word solution, but what is the answer to this? To bring women back into whatever it is they're supposed to be, that has been lost through the couple. I mean, I can only reflect on my own marriage. where everything slots in seemingly kind of by itself. I do husband things and my wife does wife things, but we raise the child, but I recognise that the wife is the one who teaches the child. My children can read Quran because of my wife, not from me. Are we being, is this the simple, to know the deen? I recognise that without the sisters, without the mothers, the deen is non-existent. That's how I see it at the moment.
Yeah. Well,
does that make sense?
Well, this is the value. You see, this is the value of what Shalakada has brought to the table. You see, it's utterly revolutionary then. And once you get it, it literally changes one's whole perspective with respect to how one then goes about this business of transforming oneself and one's situation with a desire for that, driven by the need for it, and the it's a recognition of something that maybe for those of us who have become Muslim, it was that instinct, that recognition of the way it but it often gets sidetracked very quickly. Very quickly. I go so far as to say, for so many of us, by the day after Shahada, it's almost gone.
Yeah, of course.
And but the value of this, and the various ways, coming back to the whole question of society through literature and culminating with the work of Ian Dallas of Sheikh al-Qadr, is that this is the thread running through it. This is for Muslims.
Yeah.
This gives current, urgent meaning and access to the meaning of what the deen is, what society is and what's become of it, and where to look. And suddenly a space is opened again where one can enter as one entered at the point of saying Shahada, because there was an opening there. And in a sense, Shaykh al-Qadr, as a teacher and so on, has kept it open and also kept it located, because that's the only way to keep it open. So as Hajj Samad said in the first lecture, he's established mosques and communities and has urged those communities to confront all of these issues, and in a political sense, outwardly, the question of money and justice in the area of trade and wealth and so on, and also in the family. Now, they're challenges. They challenge one, but then one always felt that taking on the deen, even at the moment of the Shahada, was going to be a challenge. And that challenge is invigorating. It's not something, it's not, it's life-giving. And one can see that there's a direction for that energy that will actually, give rise to the thing that one thought one was looking for in the first instance. So, if I think I can find a passage that brings that question of the couple, maybe makes it more accessible. Otherwise, it becomes techno speak again. Let me
Could I interpolate something in the
Yeah,
interim?
well, I'm looking for it.
Yeah, which is location. Yeah? And that is that certainly Sheikh al-Qadr and Sheikh al-Haq, who became Muslims in the 60s in Morocco, late 60s, and I, to some extent, I saw a bit of it. There were these extraordinary men and women, the like of which we'd never seen, you know, and they exemplified what we're talking about. Something was kept alive long enough for Sheikh al-Haq and Sheikh al-Qadr to see it. Yeah? So because talking about it in this way can seem a little abstract and thus a little bit threatening, and that was really something that we've kind of held to. And Sheikh al-Qadr, in a lot of his writings and a lot of his talk, he will mention extraordinary people elsewhere, not all of them Muslims, that he's seen. You know, so it has come. His pictures come from seeing the potential in men and seeing the potential in women, and actual examples. As I said, some of these, the most extraordinary were these older Moroccan people from another age that we met. Really extraordinary men and extraordinary women. And then in one way we're, you know, because we've seen it, we try to hold to it. Or to get what we can of that.
I'm aware of the time, so what I'm going to do, given the direction that our discussion has taken, I'm going to substitute this reading for the one I had in mind, which was really a bit of a shame because it's really quite stunning and wonderful, but this I think is really very relevant to this question of the couple, but in a way that, you know, it's from I'm going back to the novel of Gorka Koenig. So again, it's a picture. One can get a picture rather than, you know, this sort of analytical approach. So yeah, make yourself comfortable. This is worth hearing. The official branding of the Koenigs as Nazi sympathisers by their more liberal friends not only set them apart from the awakening life of post-war Europe, but also brought father and son closer together. Gorka had his unformed but vibrant political views to impart, and his father found that for the first time he was able to go directly from his philosophical foundations to direct demonstration and application in the ruined world that surrounded them. Gorka's view of a world in which the whole power structure operated along a totally different set of integers from that propounded and taught in public dialogue was not backed up by sufficient evidence and not made comprehensible through his lack of any capacity for formal thinking. What he could say musically he could not express in the realm of concepts, while his father extended himself and opened himself up to being an existential thinker in the true sense of applying his inner reality to impact on the world outside. Gorka experienced the frustration that combined his inability to say what he meant with the resentment that he was not accepted by society after a lifetime of being the world's darling. It was in this state of intense loneliness and bitterness that he met Frieda Ludendorff. She was a writer and a psychiatrist, popular, radical, and to Gorka Koenig, highly desirable. She was socially vivacious and in private, pensive and attentive. She knew how to pay total attention so that when another spoke, it was as if there was nothing more important than their words, nothing more necessary than a reply worthy of the compliment of that confidence. It was not love at first sight, it was intimacy at first sight. What Frieda Ludendorff brought to the Koenigs was an opening into the world of psychiatric thinking without the, to them, anti-scientific and determinist view of Freud, the Viennese novelist, as Johann Koenig called him. She helped Johann to think in psychiatric terms in a manner which widened and physicalized his whole methodology, and it was in conversation with her that he first put forward his dialectic of what he named psychiatric politics, which was to play such a key role in his The Limits of Consciousness and the Limits of Power. To Gorka Koenig, Frieda brought recognition with intimacy, which for him more than replaced the public recognition in which he used to bask. Her understanding of his gifts, her encouragement of his new desire to enter the realms of politics and philosophy expanded and deepened his intellectual character. And what was most valuable to him as a man was that he was able to see that this gift came from her and not from his own natural talent. It was she who showed him that he could be a composer with a philosophy and a political viewpoint, and that each would illuminate and explain the other. By 1946, they were married, and the Koenig Circle became again one of the most interesting and desirable circles to enter in Europe. Only this time it was private, small and exclusive, where before it had been loose and large and in the deliberate glare of public attention. With the balance of time tilting to the new generation, the Koenigs were now a distinguished composer and his clever psychiatrist wife. They were the couple. The third was no longer a precocious child genius, but an erudite, withdrawn, and melancholy man of great knowledge and sweetness, who did not wish to impose his view on anyone, for he preferred to leave the dialectic to his son and daughter-in-law. Slowly, with the years, he was taking on, unaware, the role of the rejected philosopher, Oedipus at Colonus, a man reconciled to destiny in a world which scarcely seemed to be aware of his own existence. So, lacking in self-consciousness did it seem to him. He was interviewed by a weekly and asked for his view on the post-war world. He refused, saying he did not have a view of it. They asked him to advise a philosophy for the young post-war German. He told them that he recommended they become interrogative anti-Cartesians. When they asked him to explain, he merely said, "I am, therefore, should I not think?" The interview was not published. Frida brought Gorka to life. She gave him confidence and taught him to enjoy himself without any of his mother's frivolity, yet with enormous social enthusiasm. She opened up to him the world of society, teaching him to be tolerant of different kinds of people, people who were not like them, yet interesting. She taught him how to read people, so that basically he could not make a mistake. She cautioned him, "You'll never misjudge a person now, unless, that is, you want to go to bed with them." To Gorka, the discovery of the self was as much of a surprise as the world of music had been. "They are the same," Frida used to tell him. "The notation is limited, but the expression is endless." They enjoyed each other. They quoted each other. She questioned him, drove him on, confirmed his quest. With her, he explained for the first time his views on women that he had learned from Wagner, and she seemed to embody in a most intellectual way that view of the woman completing the man, saving him. Christianity is the denial of women as having a unique and utterly vital role. They make holy motherhood that does not even need the man and is not the result of sensual delight as the meaning of woman. "I see now," she wrote to him, "how in Wagner woman is the key to man." He would confide in her the Wagner conversations he had had walking in the Bavarian snows with the Führer, and how he had reminded him that Wagner was writing a piece on the role of women in the new society at the time of his death in the Palazzo in Venice. "Women are not supposed to like Wagner. They are supposed to disapprove of him. We are supposed to love Mozart and feel morally superior." Ah, Mozart. We'd better save that one up for our reunion next week. When apart, their conversation continued in talkative letters, which they wrote almost daily. Many are filled with banalities, as one would expect, and why not? But there flashes through them, at times, the key light of an inspiration that they both seem to share, and their passion to comprehend the movements of their times and the direction in which the world was heading make them still fascinating reading. Yeah, that's the challenge in a way. And that, you see, and it's a picture, and literature can do that, can't it? It can, and we're open to it in that way. I mean, art does that for us. How long would it have taken us to see that otherwise? but then you kind of know what you're looking for in a way. Now, we're not all Gorka Koenig and Frieda Ludendorff, but we know that that's open to all of us.
Of course,
And we should look for nothing less.
yeah.
And it's a family setting. You know, it's, you know, the widowed father-in-law in the background who's happens to be a leading philosopher, but you know, it's, but still, you know, the family's a family.
Yes. Comprehend.
Yes, I think we probably, you know, at this point, I mean, I think it's as good
It's a good
point as any to end on. I think you know the yeah. I mean, the material we've covered, you know, has been really, you know, eye-opening, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege to have taken part. We have to do another at some point because there's no end to these, you know, to what, you know, literature can kind of open up to us in our quest for the recovery of the Deen. And then now at this point, you see, when I say the Deen, it's no longer this shell.
Yeah.
You know, it's a reality that one begins to be able to smell. You know, so that you know when you're getting nearer, and you know when you're. You know, it's like you said upstairs. You know, you said that, you know, your heart's here now, and it's that. You see, now the heart is what it is, and shouldn't be denied. And that's the Deen, isn't it? I mean, you know, you go to it, you know, and things open.
Becomes more attractive.
Yeah.
It's the sweetness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it takes those layers away that we all have there. Again, you know, those who came to the Deen, how, you know, life and the way things are, it suffocates this you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's different. It's not something that is actively discussed or understood by most Muslims. I
No.
think it is something that's.
No. And this is a great gift of this thing. It's a great gift. These things have to be seen and looked at and brought and confronted properly. Otherwise, it's just a kind of game, a kind of funny illusion. I mean, it's a kind of psychosis. People say in Islam and in the Deen. Where is it? In what? And what do you mean when you say that? That it's in the Deen or it's in Islam, but it's not in you? Is that what you mean?
Yes, treating it as a separate entity.
Yeah. Amazing. But nobody would question it. You can walk up to any number of Muslims and say, well, in Islam, it's like off the conversation goes.
Worse than that is, Islam says.
Yeah, oh, please.
Islam orders or commands.
Or the Sharia. Yeah.
Anyway, well, let's say Fatiha and then Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta 'alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi 'alayhim wa lad-dallin. Amin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammadin abdika wa rasulika nabiyyi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wassalamu ala al-mursalin.